All right, welcome everyone to Advisory Edge. You know me, Richard Francis, CEO of Spotlight Reporting. I am here with someone else you possibly know if you know me, Sophie Hossack, Head of Partnerships at Allica Bank, but probably more famous to those of us globally as I'm going to call you Receipt Bank Girl. That's probably quite I'll probably have to edit that bit out now. But you were the girl Friday that came down to Australia and New Zealand when you were a young whippersnapper, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. And so 13, 14 years on, long stint at Receipt Bank, now Dext. Um, Tell us a little bit about what you did after that, but also as a segue into what you're doing now at Allica Bank.
Yeah, it's
Welcome, by the
great to be.
way. I
Yeah,
didn't,
thank you.
I
It's
didn't
great
say
to be.
welcome at the start.
It's great to be with you, Richard. Yeah, so you're right. I spent kind of 8.5 years at Receipt Bank, leaving them, oh gosh, in like 2019. And I always joined Receipt Bank knowing quite deep to my core that I really wanted to be involved in starting and running a business. I didn't quite know what that meant when I was in my early 20s, but after a good stint there, I really wanted to try and do it again. So I joined a great guy called Paul, founding his business that he'd set up, which is in the health tech space. So I spent 3.5 years building a remote patient monitoring app for people going through chemotherapy primarily,
Right.
and that was awesome, super
Yeah.
challenging, but brilliant, and they're doing really well. And then there were quite a lot of similarities, oddly, between the accounting and bookkeeping world, and then you look at kind of consultants and nurses, where in accounting and bookkeeping, the SME, the business owner, is the person you're trying to help and support.
Yeah.
And of course, in clinical world, it's the patient. So there were quite a few learnings that we could like apply. But after 3.5 years, I left there and then took a bit of time out and then joined Allica. So I kind of was asked to take a look at this new digital challenger bank in the UK that we're trying to work with primarily accountants. How would we go about doing it? And it just looked like a really awesome opportunity. And they had a real commitment for wanting to develop something quite interesting with accountants. So I kind of put my hand up straight away and said, yeah, I'd love to do that.
There's that A word again. What's this love affair with accountants?
I think it's quite deep. Who knew? And I didn't realize when I was younger that I'd kind of come back.
Yeah.
'Cause it was quite a conscious choice not to take a step away. So it
Hmm.
was quite a conscious choice to change industry, and to work in a different area and sector and user and all that kind of stuff. But actually coming back, I have a real appreciation again for working with accountants. I think they're great people. I
Hmm.
think some of the top line things you can say about accountants, they really want to help and support their clients. They're problem solvers. They're detail orientated. There's a lot of thought that goes behind what they do, and they take a huge
Hmm.
amount of responsibility for making sure the businesses that they look after in their care are doing well. So that all kind of on a intrinsic human level kind of resonates. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, look, I think everything you said makes complete sense and how I've been in the industry 25 years. So what can in fact, 30 probably now. I lose count. So, we obviously like accountants and what we do. So it's fantastic that you are back in the game. Uh, and my research tells me, because even though I do kind of know you a little bit, I have done some research, and you've been talking to 1,000 accountants in the UK. Uh,
Yeah.
you probably talked to 1,000 accountants in Australia and New Zealand, if not more, and you did travel a lot. So you're probably as qualified as anyone to talk about not just the warm, cuddly people that we are, but
Mm.
when you've seen bookkeepers and accountants in business growing, not growing, all of the, adopting technology, not adopting technology, etc., over the last 10, 12 years. What has stuck out for you as, what are the success factors? What are I hesitate to call them the best accountants, what have the most successful accountants done differently to the pack?
Yeah. I think a couple of things. One is I think they viewed the client experience as a particular thing, almost like a
Mm,
product they deliver. So not just taking it for granted. They're really thinking about how do they communicate with clients, how do they onboard clients, how do they offboard clients, what are the milestones within the client journey that they can then introduce different conversations or different topics or even services. So I think that's a really key one because that breeds confidence. If you then
Mm,
are really confident that everyone that you work with receives a certain experience from your firm, you then feel much more, I think, or they do feel much more inclined to then talk about fees increasing or secondary services being built in. So I think there's that's really key. If you take it for granted, there are a couple of problems with that. One, the client doesn't know what to expect. So you might be able to offer them so much more, but because the client doesn't really know, and they may not have really worked closely with an accountant before, or they might not have worked closely with a proactive accountant before,
mm.
they're not going to be the one leading that relationship. Whereas the accountants who lead that relationship are the ones who are then using primarily technology previously. So like 12 years ago, 15 years ago, they were the ones who were using technology to kind of enable that to kind of happen. But now it's much more they're inclined to think fully about the business owner, the individual of that business, the employees, and actually what kind of advice or support or guidance does that business truly need. And the world, as we know, is super precarious, and it's heard somebody say recently we should stop using the word unprecedented because it's just become used so frequently over the last kind of 5-6 years. But it's true. Business owners need a lot of help and support and guidance. The
Mm.
people who do that are accountants, but it's the accountants who are really thoughtful around what does that really mean? What can I actually do? What role can I actually play? And how do we build our firm to deliver that at scale? Those are the ones who I think are the ones who are doing really well and have previously done well too.
Yeah, you made some really interesting points there. I mean, obviously the COVID period and the years since have become less unprecedented and just the new norm, unfortunately. So
Mm-hmm.
SMBs, and we see this at Spotlight reporting all the time, the need for accountants to do that, to see the wider
Mm-hmm.
view, to actually look, and I used to do this when I was an advisory accountant, look at the business, personal and financial holistically and have those human cadences. I'm doing a slide for an event next week in Sydney. I talk about human cadences, that kind of sitting down and talking to people, and it's amazing what comes out when you do. And putting a mercenary hat on, in services that can be sold when you hear about what they're struggling with. Um, do you feel that in this kind of age of AI and, digital banks and everything kind of being technology driven, are we losing that human touch, or has it become more important?
It's a really good question. And the honest answer is I don't know. I don't know long term. I think as humans, we like, as we all know, like to be communicated in certain ways. We absorb information in certain ways. Some people are really numeric, some people are much more written, some people like a verbal. I think there's an appreciation now that if you're communicating with other people, so if you're an accountant communicating with a client, understanding what they like and what is good for them to hear and how do they hear that information is really key. Whether you can use technology to kind of enhance that, whether you can use technology to automate a lot of that or almost pre-program, if you're using AI, your emails get created and curated in a certain way, certain templates for certain profiles. Leveraging that, I think, is really key. But I still think in the main, people like support from people. They like the convenience of tech. They like the convenience of being able to do it on their own time when they're ready. But they actually like the support from a person saying, let me do this for you, or let me guide you through this. At Allica, our whole proposition is about relationship banking. So in the UK, over the last 10, 15, even a bit longer years, we've seen the real retrenchment of account managers and relationship managers from banks. So
The
the
high
banks,
street is the high street bank offices have gone, haven't they now? Pretty
yeah,
much.
all of the branches left, particularly like the
Yeah.
towns and the small towns. Um, and the business owners just didn't really know where to turn to. And there's a really big impact on that on borrowing appetites. So we recently produced a report looking at 20 years worth of lending in the UK.
Mm.
And 77% of SMEs in the UK last year said they prefer to grow slowly than borrow money. So actually the appetite is just,
Yeah.
so low because
And
it's
a lack of
been
trust.
totally,
Yeah.
totally. So if you go back to your question about is that like, does the human touch matter? It's like, well, it does, because actually that breeds a sense of understanding, trust, confidence in the decisions that you can make. Whether you do make them or not is your decision, but like what's available to you. So it is really important ultimately to blend the two, I think.
Right. So it's really interesting for us because obviously we're a software house. We have a lot of automation, as you know, Receipt Bank did, and layering in AI is important because as long as it makes things more efficient and effective. But I keep coming back, and occasionally you feel like a broken record about advisory is human.
Yeah.
So I think that's hugely important because people are paying for the empathy, experience, insight, the emotion even of another human connecting with their business, personal and financial matters. So it's really interesting to see that coming back to banks. So I know you're a
Yeah.
multi-touch bank. Um, but what I'm intrigued by is, you've been head of partnerships at Receipt Bank, Careology, you're now doing this at Allica Bank. So
Mm.
partnerships can also be remote, paper-driven, kind of artifacts, or they can be human to human connections. So looking
Yeah.
at your partnership strategy and all of the experience you've brought from, I suppose, the best part of a decade of doing this. Um,
Mm.
and I ask this question in the context of accounting firms as well, because I think they do tend to struggle sometimes with executing on and maintaining partnerships
Mm.
beyond the zero con parties and some of that stuff. What have you learned around partnering, and what would you advise that accounting firm, that accountant, that bookkeeper who's setting up in practice and wanting to grow and do all the cool things that come from owning your own business?
I think one thing is to know that there are different types of partnerships and there are different benefits
Okay.
from working with
Hmm.
others. So sometimes it can be like a halo effect. So actually, sometimes working with another company or brand and leveraging their branding and their kind of awareness in the market is really really valuable.
Hmm.
And being able to position yourself alongside another company can be really really strong. So sometimes it's a halo effect thing.
Maybe a bank?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Just-
right. So like I was actually thinking about the health tech that I was involved in. We spent quite a
Right.
lot of time in the early years working with one of the leading charities here in the UK that looks
Ah,
after
okay.
that area. And actually to start with, it was really good because it was a proposition for both, that it
Mm,
was, you know, um, them using innovative tech, us being able to then work with like a leading trusted brand in that area. So sometimes the halo effect is really key. Sometimes it can be more like embedded and more entrenched. And I
hmm.
know in the receipt bank days, we would work really closely with you at Spotlight and looking at, okay, well, what does the overall kind of solution look like for a firm if you're using, receipt bank Dext, whether it's
Yeah.
Zero and or whichever accounting software, and then Spotlight. Actually, that became a really compelling proposition for firms to understand, okay, there's a journey here, and actually I can plug
Mm,
in three really key kind of best of breed tools to deliver that. And that kind of partnership is a bit more embedded because you're looking at back to that journey and what can be supported. And then you've got things like, okay, is there a commercial element to a partnership? Does that mean that either there's financial recognition that could be in the form of discounts, it could be in the form of a referral fee, it could be in the form of some sort of budget allocated to the partner. So there's different ways of thinking about what does a partnership look like and mean to businesses. I think that's quite key. They're not all the same, and you shouldn't expect one to do all three. And there are lots of other variations of, but knowing what the key thing is for working with another organisation, it's important. So at Allica, we've built out a lot of soft value to our accounting partners. We really think about what is it that we can do to shine a spotlight on them, to raise their awareness within our kind of customer base, community base.
hmm.
And we look at doing spotlights on, say, social media posts on our LinkedIn. We have an online
Okay.
directory. There's like case study style work that we like to do. We like to really talk about the people that are having an impact on the business owner.
Yeah.
We don't offer, for example, at Allica in this instance, any financial reward, and that fits really well. So there are different ways
Mm,
of looking at what does a partnership mean. Second then thing is to then work out what's really important to both. what is it that's important to both organizations when you're looking to work together? Having some sort of common understanding, and you've got to be
Yeah.
quite trusting. You've got to actually share, like, this is really important to my business, or this is really important to my clients, or this is what I'm really hoping to achieve by working with you. And then making sure the other person really understands that, and then they can bring something to the table that contributes, and vice versa. Having that level of trust, I think, is really key. Your point about human relationships and empathy is spot on, because you've got to be able to know what the organizations are trying to achieve. It's much harder, I think, to build a partnership where it's quite removed. And that could be like an app store style concept, right? You could
Yeah.
be put on a list or on a page, and just people are expected to come and find you. People don't just find things; they never have. Like,
Mm.
unless you're, top pick on the App Store, on the Apple App Store, or something, on the Google
Yeah.
App Store. I remember at the beginning days of Receipt Bank, we integrated the first accounting software platform we integrated with was one in the UK called Cashflow, and we would put on there kind of, they didn't call it an app store at the time, but it was an equivalent to that. And we thought, brilliant, that's amazing. That's going to drive
Waited by
loads
the
of
phone for the calls.
traffic. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Wait on the phone. Of course, nobody called, right?
Yeah.
Nobody called.
Yeah.
You have to kind of get up, get out every day, and then demonstrate why you're talking to the organization or how you're helping them. Yeah. So long-winded answer to your question there.
No, I think if you're setting up an accounting firm, or you're in a struggling accounting firm, or an accounting firm that wants to grow, you should play back that 3-minute answer, because there's a lot of gems in there. I remember when I started my practice here in Wellington, NZ, um, setting up a lot of partnerships. We spoke to banks, we spoke to lawyers, we spoke to marketeers, etc. And sometimes I learned the hard way that we hadn't really worked out what that point of mutual benefit was. It was one
Mm.
way, it was transactional. So sometimes, those things didn't work. One of the best partnerships I actually had was an accountant down the corridor from the building I was in, who was a compliance jockey. I was, trying to do all the cool stuff, and he was scared by any of the cool stuff like advisory and strategy and mentoring, and would send them to me, and I would get rid of um, my compliance customers or prospects to him, and he loved that. So yeah, I think finding what's that point of mutual benefit, and then meeting as humans and kind of connecting and making sure that works. And at Spotlight Reporting, we partner with some great apps and some obviously wonderful accounting firms. But every day I deal with partnership requests and things, and I've had two today. I'm just sharing because it really resonated with me. One was kind of out of the blue without really any background or any connection to it. Another one was actually a half-hour decent meeting, two humans, myself and someone else, talking about what success looked like in a partnership. And yeah, I think you can probably guess, which way we would be going. So I think that's really important, and you've learned a lot over the years from, no doubt, partnerships that have gone pear-shaped and ones that have gone successfully.
Yeah, totally. And also one where the timing's not quite right. The timing could be better later on, or you might have also missed
True.
that timing. So there's
Mm.
something there that's really important. I think your point around your best partnership when you were an accountant was with another accountant is such a good point. Like, looking at the other professional advisors in your network, who
Kind
do
of
you
sounds a
work?
bit sad, really, doesn't it? Like we were the only people that could communicate on
No,
the right
it's really
language.
important. Because, like, you talk about accountants and bookkeepers working really closely together, and how that has
Yeah.
been, waves over time, whether it's been really embedded or further
Mm.
removed, or where we are at that stage. But we've just seen another, large acquisition or merger of two firms in the UK this week
Yeah, there's a
being,
lot of that going on.
yeah, and actually it's because they've been working together. They've been kind of, cross-contaminating clients and skill
Mm.
set services for a number of years, and now it's a good time for them to actually formalize it. So you think about, it doesn't have to be competitive when you work with other people in your space. It can be much more collaborative. I think that's a
Mm.
really, really good point that you make.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more opportunity to learn from each other, and the community feels reasonably strong. And I think, Zero and their ecosystem and some of the other ecosystems that have spun up, and all of us who have gone to everything everywhere over the years have been part of that. Um, in in the
Change. Has that changed, do you think, over time? Like, because when we started the road shows and being on the road shows, it was really very trusting very quickly. There was a group of like six businesses where I remember going for dinners and breakfasts and coffees and at the
Yes.
show talking about like what software you're using for customer support, what software you're using for
We were all
payments.
startups, though, Soph, weren't we? I think that was
Yeah.
probably the difference. So it has, in my view. I mean, you'll have a view because you're still either, in the ecosystem or on the periphery of it. I do feel like it has become more corporate as, I suppose, the alphas in the gene pool become billion-dollar or multi-billion-dollar corporations. So I think there's still the threat of that, definitely, but there's thousands of add-ons and things out there now, and everyone's yeah. Um, Perhaps it's become slightly more mercenary, but yeah. Do you have a view on that?
I think I maybe your point about the startups is a key thing because I think founders are inherently curious and also open to being given help and asking for help. Whereas, of course, if you're an employee at a company, you don't necessarily think about asking those questions of
Yeah.
other companies. So maybe those informal discussions aren't happening as much because actually,
If
if
you're
you're,
employee number 1,000, I think it's different to, you were
yeah,
the only Australia New Zealand
yeah,
person at Receipt Bank for some time, really, weren't you?
yeah,
We thought
yes.
we thought you'd been abandoned down here. Actually, we were quite shocked.
I think they thought they'd done a good job of
Sent you to
abandoning
the
me.
furthest ends of the earth. Golly,
I know. I loved it though.
brilliant. Um, so I'm conscious of time, and I'm conscious of. I did say to you we're going to try and keep it to about half an hour. There's so much more we could talk about. Maybe we'll do a follow up. But I've got that hard question that you said, "Golly, you're going to ask me that." So the slightly wiser, slightly older, although you look ageless, Sophie, now back in London. You've had some amazing jobs with some amazing people, and had some amazing achievements yourself. What would you say to the young Sophie, or indeed anyone else starting out at early in their career at an accounting firm or maybe at a startup? Save them
Yeah.
some battle scars, Sophie.
Oh my
Or
gosh.
maybe that's part of it. Maybe they need to get those.
Yeah. I I don't oh gosh, I don't know what I would say. I really don't know what I would say. I think what I've learned is particularly at the moment and where I am, I'm choosing to really enjoy what I'm doing every day. And it's a bit naff when people say like enjoy the journey or enjoy the small things. But I loved my time at Receipt Bank. I can't emphasize that enough. I absolutely loved it. I
Mm.
relished the responsibility. I was given so many opportunities to grow, to meet interesting people, to develop. At the
Worked
same
with a
time,
few legends on the way. Yeah.
work with some absolute legends of the industry along the way. But at the time, I felt there was enormous pressure with that. And
Mm.
the more successful we became, the more pressure I felt and the more heavy that sat on me. So actually, throughout it, although I loved it, I didn't always feel like I was enjoying it or showing up as my best possible
Mm.
self throughout it because I was so nervous at times and so like um, focused on the next thing.
Yep.
Whereas this time around, I'm really choosing to say like to myself, you want to show up as the best version of yourself, and that's a work in progress because there's still lots of areas that I need to improve upon. But actually, how do I make sure I'm enjoying the challenging stuff, not being daunted by it? How do I make sure I'm enjoying
So how do you
when it's
do that? Because I think that's a really interesting point. And generally, those of us with a few more miles on the tank do talk about stopping to smell the roses, and we wish we'd done
yeah,
some of that. But I know that there'll be a lot of people listening to this who are and accountants. You touched on it because they love working with their clients and helping out. They work long hours, they're stressed. It's a real issue in the accounting space. What
yeah.
does enjoying each day mean? Have you got anything you can share on that?
I think one thing is I I used to think what we were doing was normal, and so I used to think that you could just do it again and again and again.
Yeah.
I think now I've got the appreciation, particularly at Allica, of like, I can't believe I get to do this again. Like, I can't believe I get to do this again. Like, it almost feels like lightning struck twice, and like, gosh, how lucky am I?
Yeah.
And I think actually having that mentality, you can put that in anything. Like, gosh, I can't believe I get to work with this client when they're doing this amazing thing or the really tricky thing, or I get to be involved in this, rather than feeling like, oh my gosh, this is a huge mammoth
So
task that I'm
that's
going to.
that's a mindset, you're on this side of the fence or the other side, aren't you? To
Yeah,
that challenging client you've got who's actually doing something amazing, not seeing that as more work if you're an accountant, but actually
yeah.
something you
There's
want
a
to do.
moment, yeah, you get to like be involved in that. So I think there's that. And then I've done quite a lot of work with lots of different people, whether that's kind of coaches or worked with a therapist for a long time. But my career coach, who I absolutely love, Mike, he is just phenomenal. I was emailing him on Friday, and he just reminded me it's all about just expanding and enhancing who you already are, rather than
Yeah,
changing who you are. Rather than
nice.
thinking I'm not good at this and I've got to get better at that, it's actually about developing,
Yeah,
like developing the things that you're really good at and then really allowing that to kind of flourish. And by flourishing, you will hopefully get the opportunity to get better and kind of add to your skill set. I think that's a really key thing that I've learned along the way. And that helps with the everyday enjoyment. Because if I know that I'm showing up well, and
yeah.
I think that helps, and just being a bit more myself. So those two things. And again, that's really relevant for accountants because we've seen it in the past. There have been younger people who buy into the firm or become a partner of a
Mm,
firm, and they think they need to act in a certain way. And then suddenly, when they realize they
yeah.
don't, they get to have a much more freeing experience of who they
Or
are
they
and how
need
they.
to sacrifice certain things. I mean, I remember when I was offered a partnership where I started out, um, I went to the UK and I fled the scene really because I could see the partners working long hours, never getting on top of their work, missing their children's birthdays and things like that. And even as a relatively young person then, I could see that they weren't really sacrifices of life that I wanted to make. So
Mm.
I think what you're saying is quite powerful, and I like the fact you've got a career coach. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I was really lucky. I was really lucky. That was from the health tech. So from Careology, Paul introduced me to Mike, and I was very, very grateful for that experience. But Mike Pegg. I'll send you the link so anyone can look at his articles online. They're
Brilliant.
all available.
But I
They're
think
super.
that's so important having whether it's a career coach, a mentor, a safety valve, because accountants do. I mean, there's a little bit of the martyr syndrome, but I think we do because there's that genuine care there sometimes, overwork and overstress and sacrificing too many of the good things. So even if we just take that from our chat today, Sophie, I think that's quite powerful.
I'll just kind of leave one thing that I
You
remember
can.
in Australia. It was the Accountants Daily Awards. I can't remember which year it was. It was one of the early ones, so maybe 2015, something like that. And
Right.
I can't remember who the winner was. I don't know who the man's name was, and I'm kind of gutted about that. It wasn't somebody I knew at the time, um, but he won an award, and it was like an individual award as an accountant, and he
Mm,
was a man. I'm assuming in his maybe late 40s to late 50s, in that kind of decade range. And he got up on stage and was highly emotional. He was highly emotional that he'd won this award.
right.
Um, and he was just saying, how grateful he was, how thankful he was for winning it. It meant so much to him because he took on, all of his peers did in the room, so much responsibility for his clients. And you could feel the weight that he had, the weight he had on his shoulders. Like you could feel
Mm,
it for him. And I can still kind of picture him on stage because it was so emotive to me to hear somebody just almost unburden a bit in front of all of these
yeah.
people. Um, and I think accountants need help, support, awareness that they're not alone. There are their
Mm.
peers who are with them, um, and also kind of networks who can support as well.
Absolutely. I think that's so massively important, particularly with, mental health in the industry. And I think a lot of accountants do feel lonely with those challenges, particularly if you're in a smaller business and you're looking after lots of clients, particularly in this environment where, we've had a few years now of all sorts of crazy things going on economically and beyond.
Yeah.
Sophie, it's been an absolute pleasure. There have been lots of gems throughout our chat, not only for those starting out on the journey, but for those a little bit further along, like myself. who need to sometimes take some of that advice and learn um, that, it is really important to enjoy what you do, make sure that, you're in charge of that, aren't you, and the choices you make. So I thought that was really powerful. And just some tips around partnering, accountants partner, get support networks, get that mentor, get that career coach, whatever it happens to be, realize you're part of a community as well. So many, many thanks. You've had a really interesting career and journey to date, and long may it continue. Um, I think it's your turn to buy the breakfast next time in
Definitely.
London. So looking forward to seeing you again, and looking forward to not only seeing your trajectory, but that of Allica Bank as well. So many thanks and take care.
Thank you so much.